When I walked into that courtroom in my dress whites, my father shouted across the polished wood and brass fixtures like we were alone in his study instead of surrounded by 40 strangers and the weight of Virginia law. His voice cracked through the air, sharp enough that the clerk's pen froze mid-stroke.
You've humiliated me for the last time.
I didn't flinch. Years of standing watch on rolling decks had taught me how to keep my body still when the world pitched sideways. I kept my hands at my sides, shoulders square, eyes forward. The Norfolk Circuit Court smelled like floor wax and old paper, the kind of institutional scent that made voices drop automatically, as if the walls themselves demanded reverence. Judge Margaret Dalton looked up from the bench, her reading glasses catching the September morning light streaming through the tall windows. She was maybe 67, hair steel gray and pulled back in a tight bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Her eyes moved from my father to me, and I watched them pause at my chest. Not at me, but at the ribbon rack above my left breast pocket. The colored bars told a story I'd never shared with the man now red-faced and trembling 30 feet away. The judge set down her pen with the kind of deliberate care that made the room go quieter than silence. "Sir, do you truly not know what your daughter has done?" The question hung in the air like smoke. My father, Graham Whitmore, 80 years old, 6 feet tall even with the slight stoop age had given him, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, opened his mouth and closed it again. His attorney, a slick-looking man in his 50s with too much product in his hair, leaned in to whisper something, but my father waved him off with the impatient gesture of someone used to being obeyed. "What do you mean? What don't I know?" The room shifted. I felt it in my chest, that subtle change in air pressure that comes before a storm breaks. My hand found the worn brass in my pocket, my grandmother's compass from the war, and the familiar weight steadied me the way it always had. I had imagined this room 1,000 times over the past 4 weeks, not because I wanted to win, not because I craved vindication, but because I knew that sooner or later truth has to stand on its own feet. It can't stay hidden forever, no matter how many people try to bury it. The judge leaned back in her chair, studying my father with the expression of someone who'd seen every variety of human foolishness and wasn't surprised anymore, just tired. "We'll address that shortly, Mr. Whitmore. Please take your seat." 4 weeks earlier, the envelope had arrived on a Tuesday morning in late August. I'd been kneeling in the small front yard of my rental house, pulling weeds that had grown wild along the chain-link fence during the summer humidity. Norfolk in August felt like breathing through a wet towel, and sweat had soaked through my t-shirt before 9 a.m. My knee, the left one, the one that had ended my career 6 years ago, ached with the dull persistence that meant rain was coming, even though the sky stretched blue and cloudless overhead. Anchor lay in the shade of the porch, his breathing slow and heavy. 12 years old now. My retired military working dog didn't move much anymore except to follow me from room to room and collapse with heavy sighs that sounded like contentment. One ear twitched when the mail truck rumbled past, but he didn't lift his head. I wiped dirt from my hands onto my jeans and took the envelope from the carrier, a young woman who always smiled when she saw Anchor. That's official looking, Emmy." "Thanks, Maria." Cream-colored paper, thick stock, county seal embossed in the corner. I knew what it was before I opened it. The way you know the smell of smoke means fire somewhere close. My thumb slid under the flap and tore it open. The letterhead read, Norfolk Circuit Court in serif font that tried to look dignified but just looked expensive. My eyes skipped over the legal preamble, whereas and heretofore and petitioner, and landed on the names. Graham A. Whitmore versus Victoria L. Whitmore. My father was suing me. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. The petition claimed I was mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. It cited my PTSD diagnosis, my unstable lifestyle, my abandonment of family responsibilities. It asked the court to declare me unfit and appoint my father as guardian of my estate. At stake was the beachfront property my grandmother had left me 5 years ago. A 3-acre plot in Virginia Beach, worth $1.4 million, according to the most recent appraisal. The same property I'd visited every month since her death, maintaining and protecting and pouring money into, while my father hadn't set foot there since the funeral. I laughed once, a short, dry sound that startled Anchor awake. He lifted his grizzled head and looked at me with brown eyes that had seen combat in places whose names I still couldn't say out loud. 14 years of silence, now this. I carried the summons inside and set it on the kitchen table. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, windows that stuck in humid weather. But it was mine in the way that mattered. I paid rent on time. I kept it clean. Nobody could take it from me for being myself. Anchor limped over and pressed his heavy head against my thigh. I scratched behind his ears, feeling the familiar calm settle over me like a coat I'd worn so many times it fit perfectly. I guess we're doing this. That night, I sat at the table long after midnight, reading and rereading the legal language that tried to reduce 38 years of my relationship with my father into bullet points and whereas clauses. Outside, cicadas screamed their late summer song, relentless and loud. The window unit air conditioner rattled and dripped, fighting a losing battle against the heat. I thought about all the things I hadn't told him over the years, not because they were secrets, but because he'd never asked. Not once in 14 years had he called to say, "How are you? What are you doing? Are you safe? Are you happy?" The silence had flowed both ways, but only one of us had chosen it first. The day I left home played in my memory with the clarity of trauma, every detail sharp enough to cut. I'd been 28 years old, newly promoted to lieutenant, fresh back from a deployment that had left me thinner and quieter, and sure of exactly one thing: I would never apologize for who I'd become. My father was hosting a garden party, that's what he called it, though it was really just another excuse for him to hold court among the neighbors and business associates he spent his life impressing. The yard had been full of people in expensive casual wear, the kind of clothes that looked effortless but cost more than a month's worth of my military pay. White tablecloths, catered food. My father in the center of it all, holding a tumbler of bourbon and telling stories with the easy confidence of a man who'd never been told no. I'd been standing near the hedge, trying to decide if I could leave without being noticed, when I heard my name. A woman I vaguely recognized, one of my father's golf partner's wives, maybe, had approached him with a smile that looked genuinely warm. "Graham, your daughter just returned from deployment, yes? You must be so proud." I'd watched my father's face, waiting for something I couldn't name. He'd taken a sip of his drink, ice clinking against glass. "Nathan's the one making real contributions. Victoria's finding herself, I suppose." The woman had looked confused. "But military service, let's discuss something more pleasant." He turned away, leaving the woman standing there with her champagne flute and her bewildered expression. I'd felt something crack inside my chest. A clean break like stepping on ice you thought was solid. I'd found him later, alone in his study, pouring another drink. "Why can't you just say you're proud?" He'd looked up, startled. In that moment, I'd seen something flash across his face. Not anger, but something worse. Discomfort, embarrassment. Like I was a problem he'd been trying to solve for years and still couldn't figure out. "Pride, you embarrass this family. People ask why my daughter is playing soldier instead of settling down." "Playing? I save lives, Dad. What do? Sell insurance policies?" His face had gone red, the way it always did when someone challenged him. "How dare you? Get out, and don't come back until you've learned respect." "I learned respect. From the Navy, not from you." My father had pointed at the door. "Out, now." I'd walked out of that house with my duffel bag and the growing certainty that some distances couldn't be measured in miles. I hadn't been back since. The morning after receiving the summons, I drove to the courthouse to file my response. The clerk was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and the straight posture of someone who'd worn a uniform. Her name tag read M. Sullivan. "You're representing yourself, ma'am?" "Yes." She'd looked at me over her reading glasses, taking in the ribbon rack on my casual shirt. I wore them even on civilian clothes, a habit I couldn't break, and something shifted in her expression. "Ma'am, you're Lieutenant Commander Whitmore, aren't you?" I read about the hurricane rescue. I'd kept my face neutral. "Just doing my job." "Your father doesn't know, does he?" The question had landed like a punch I'd been expecting. He never asked. She'd nodded slowly, understanding more than I'd said. "I'll make sure Judge Dalton gets this case. She's Navy too, JAG officer, 20 years. Now, standing in that courtroom 4 weeks later, I understood what the clerk had known. Some battles required witnesses who understood the language. My brother Nathan's voice on the phone 3 nights ago had been thick with something I'd never heard from him before. Tears, maybe, or rage that had finally found its way out. Tori, I can't do this anymore. It was past midnight. I'd been sitting on my back porch, watching Anchor chase rabbits in his sleep, his legs twitching with dreams of younger days. Can't do what? Lie, pretend, play the perfect son. He'd told me everything then, words spilling out like he'd been holding his breath for years. How he'd turned down the CEO position at the family insurance company in 2018 to work at Habitat for Humanity. How our father had called him a fool, a disappointment, an embarrassment. How Graham had told everyone Nathan was too busy with work to visit, when the truth was he'd been disowned for choosing meaning over money. I'm testifying, for you, against him. Nathan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He destroyed both of us. I was just too much of a coward to leave. The night before the hearing, I'd sat at my kitchen table and laid out everything I had. 14 years of property tax receipts for grandmother's house, totaling $52,000. Maintenance records, roof repair, plumbing, storm damage after Hurricane Isaias. Another $38,000. All of it paid from my Navy salary and then my disability pension, while my father claimed I'd abandoned family responsibilities. I'd pulled out the charitable donation records too, $98,000 over 14 years, given to veteran organizations and disaster relief funds and anonymous scholarships. Not because I wanted credit, but because it was right. Because I'd been taught that rank is a privilege that demands you serve those who serve. Grandmother's will lay on top of everything else, her handwriting still clear despite the tremor age had given her in those final months. In the margin next to my name, she'd written, Victoria is the only one who understands what truly matters. I'd made my decision then. I would wear my dress whites to court, not as a costume or a statement, but as a reminder, to myself more than anyone, of who I'd become when I'd finally been allowed to choose my own path. The uniform still fit, though I hadn't worn it in 6 years. The fabric held memories in its creases, formations at dawn, ceremonies for the fallen, the weight of responsibility that came with putting it on. I'd stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the ribbon rack until it sat precisely 1/4 inch above my left breast pocket, and made myself a promise. I would not attack my father. I would not raise my voice or lose my composure or give him the satisfaction of reducing me to anger. I would simply present facts and let them speak with the clarity that truth always carried when you stopped dressing it up in excuses. Now Judge Dalton's voice brought me back to the present. Mr. Barrett, you may proceed with your opening statement. My father's attorney stood, smoothing his tie with the practiced gesture of someone who spent a lot of time in courtrooms. Dennis Barrett, according to the paperwork. Corporate law specialist. The kind of lawyer who won cases by making everything sound reasonable and inevitable. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of ensuring proper guardianship for someone who, through no fault of her own, is unable to manage significant assets responsibly. He'd opened a folder, pulling out documents with the theatrical timing of a magician revealing cards. The petitioner, Mr. Graham Whitmore, seeks this declaration not out of malice, but out of concern. His daughter, Victoria Whitmore, has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and takes medication for this condition. She has lived what can only be described as a transient lifestyle for the past 14 years, maintaining minimal contact with family, never establishing stable roots, no home ownership, no marriage, no children. I'd watch my father sitting beside his attorney, hands folded on the table, face set in an expression of sorrowful determination. He'd practiced that look, I realized, probably in mirrors, perfecting the image of a concerned parent making a difficult but necessary choice. Barrett had continued, building his case like a prosecutor who'd already won. Ms. Whitmore's grandmother left her property valued at $1.4 million. The family is concerned that, given her documented mental health struggles and unstable lifestyle, she may not be capable of making sound decisions regarding this asset. Mr. Whitmore seeks only to protect his daughter and preserve family property for future generations. Your Honor, if I may, my father had stood before the judge could respond, unable to contain himself. Some men aged into patience and wisdom. Graham Whitmore had aged into the certainty that his opinions were facts that needed to be shared. Your Honor, my daughter has always been difficult, willful. She refused to listen, refused the proper path. The judge had looked at him with an expression I'd seen on drill sergeants' faces when recruits spoke out of turn. Mr. Whitmore, your attorney is speaking for you. Please be seated. But he'd kept going, words tumbling out with the momentum of decades. Joining the military instead of college, rejecting perfectly good marriage prospects, cutting off family for 14 years, this behavior is not normal. It's proof she cannot make sound decisions. Mr. Whitmore, sit down. The command in Judge Dalton's voice could have stopped a charging bull. My father had sat, but his face had gone redder, hands trembling with suppressed fury or embarrassment or both. I'd stood then, slowly, with the precise movements the Navy had drilled into me until they became second nature. Your Honor, may I respond? You may, Ms. Whitmore. I'd opened my folder, a single manila folder, thin compared to the stack Barrett had, and pulled out the first document. These are property tax records for the beachfront property in question. Paid on time every year for 14 years. Total payments $52,000. I'd handed the papers to the clerk, who'd passed them up to the judge. Source of funds, my naval officer salary, and after my medical retirement, my disability pension. I'd pulled out the next stack. Maintenance records, roof repair after Hurricane Isaiah's, plumbing updates, electrical work, tree removal, total expenditure, $38,000. All work documented, all contractors licensed, all payments from my personal accounts. The courtroom had gone quiet, except for the whisper of papers being reviewed. Your Honor, my father claims I've abandoned family responsibilities. I would ask, who has been responsible for this property? Who has ensured it remained safe, maintained, properly taxed? My father hasn't visited that house in 5 years since my grandmother's funeral. I visit every month. I'd looked at my father then, really looked at him for the first time since I'd entered the courtroom. His mouth had fallen open slightly, his expression somewhere between shock and confusion. I didn't know. I didn't know you were doing that. You never asked. 3 words. They'd landed in the silence like stones dropping into still water, ripples spreading outward. Judge Dalton had leaned forward, her voice quiet but sharp. Mr. Whitmore, your petition claims your daughter is irresponsible with assets. Yet she has paid $90,000 for property upkeep, while you have contributed? She'd let the question hang. My father's attorney had jumped in, trying to redirect. Your Honor, the issue isn't property maintenance. It's mental fitness to make future decisions. Ms. Whitmore's PTSD diagnosis. Counselor, the judge's interruption had been soft, but absolute. I also have a PTSD diagnosis from my service. 20 years as a JAG officer, including deployments to combat zones. Are you suggesting I'm unfit to serve on this bench? Barrett's face had gone pale. No, Your Honor, of course not. I only meant... Then be very careful with your next words. The attorney had shuffled his papers, and in that moment of silence, I'd heard someone in the gallery whisper to their neighbor. The sound had carried farther than they'd intended. That's the woman from the hurricane. My father had turned, looking back at the spectators, then at me, then at his attorney. What hurricane? The courtroom door had opened then, and my brother Nathan had walked in. 59 years old, wearing a suit that fit well but wasn't expensive, his hair graying at the temples, and his face carrying the lines of someone who'd stopped pretending years ago and found peace in honesty. He'd walked to the witness area without being called. Your Honor, I'm Nathan Whitmore. I'd like to testify. My father had half risen from his chair. Nathan, what are you doing here? What I should have done years ago, Dad, telling the truth. Judge Dalton had nodded. Mr. Nathan Whitmore, please take the stand. My brother had been sworn in, his hands steady on the Bible, his voice clear when he'd promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. I'd wondered if he felt the same thing I'd felt standing in that courtroom. The relief that comes when you finally stop running from honesty. Mr. Whitmore, please state your relationship to the parties in this case. I'm Graham Whitmore's son, Victoria's older brother. And you wish to testify regarding... Nathan had looked at our father, and something passed between them. Not anger, not even disappointment, but something sadder. Recognition of time wasted, maybe. Chances lost. I wish to testify about a pattern of behavior. My father's pattern, not my sister's. The courtroom had shifted again. That subtle intake of breath that happens when everyone realizes the story is about to change direction. In 2018, I was offered the position of CEO at Whitmore Insurance. The company my father built over 40 years, I turned it down. My father had started to stand, but his attorney had pulled him back down. I turned it down because I hated that work. I'd spent 30 years in corporate law, making money for people who already had money, and I was empty, hollow. I joined Habitat for Humanity, took a 70% pay cut, started building homes for families who needed them. Nathan's voice had stayed level, factual, like he was reading from a report instead of excavating his own pain. My father told me I was throwing my life away, that I was an embarrassment to the family name. He said, Nathan had paused, swallowing hard. He said I was dead to him. Nathan, that's not. My father had tried to interrupt, but the judge had silenced him with a look. For 6 years, we haven't spoken. My father tells people I'm too busy with work to visit. The truth is, he disowned me for choosing service over status. Nathan had turned to look at me then, his eyes bright with unshed tears. My sister Victoria joined the Navy at 19. I was 31, already climbing the corporate ladder, already playing the role Dad wanted. I watched him treat her the same way he'd later treat me, like her choices were personal insults instead of acts of courage. He'd pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. This is the note Dad sent back when Tori invited him to her promotion ceremony in 2014. It says, unnecessary. One word, that's what her achievement was worth to him. I'd had no idea Nathan had kept that note. I'd thrown mine away years ago, trying not to let it matter. Your Honor, my father isn't suing my sister because she's incompetent. He's suing her because he can't control her. And for Graham Whitmore, anything he can't control is a threat. My father had stood then, shaking off his attorney's restraining hand. You don't understand. Either of you. I built everything we have. I gave you opportunities, education, a name that means something in this community, and you both threw it away. To do what, Dad? Nathan's voice had risen for the first time. To help people? To serve something bigger than ourselves? Why is that shameful? Because people talk. Because it makes us look. It makes us look like what? Like we care about more than money and reputation? Judge Dalton had brought her gavel down, the crack echoing like a gunshot. Gentlemen, this is a courtroom, not a family therapy session. Mr. Graham Whitmore, sit down and do not speak again without being addressed. Mr. Nathan Whitmore, do you have additional testimony relevant to this case? Yes, Your Honor. My father's medical records petition claims Tori has PTSD and therefore can't manage assets. I'd like the court to know that Dad himself has been on anxiety medication for 15 years, high blood pressure medication, sleeping pills. He didn't think that was relevant to mention. Barrett had objected, but the damage was done. The perfect image my father had tried to project, concerned parent, stable guardian, had started to crack. The back door of the courtroom had opened again, and this time an older woman had entered. I'd recognized her immediately. Patricia Whitmore, my mother, 78 years old, wearing a simple blue dress and the pearls she'd worn every day of my childhood. Her hands had trembled as she'd walked to the witness area, but her spine was straight. Your Honor, I'm Patricia Whitmore. I'd like to testify as well. My father had gone very still. Patricia, what are you doing? She'd looked at him, and in her eyes I'd seen something I'd never seen before. Not love, not hate, but something harder and clearer. Decision. I'm doing what I should have done 52 years ago, Graham. I'm speaking. Judge Dalton had gestured to the witness stand. Mrs. Whitmore, please. My mother had been sworn in, her voice soft but steady. When she'd sat down, she'd folded her hands in her lap the way she always did when she needed to compose herself. I found something 6 months ago. In my husband's office, in a locked drawer I wasn't supposed to open. She'd pulled a stack of envelopes from her purse, tied with a ribbon. Even from where I stood, I could see they were all addressed in the same handwriting, my mother's handwriting. For 14 years, I wrote letters to my daughter. Every week, telling her I loved her, that I was sorry, that I was proud of her. She'd looked at my father, and her voice had hardened just slightly. My husband intercepted everyone, hid them, kept them locked away so Victoria would never know I was reaching out. The courtroom had erupted in whispers. Judge Dalton had let it go for a moment before calling for order. Mrs. Whitmore, why are you bringing this forward now? Because 3 months ago, when I found those letters, I filed for divorce. My father had stood up so fast his chair had scraped backward. You what? I filed for divorce, Graham. After 52 years of silence, after watching you destroy our children's spirits with your need for control, I'm done. She turned to Judge Dalton. her voice growing stronger. Your Honor, my husband isn't suing our daughter because he's concerned about her welfare. He's suing her to prove to me and to himself that he's still the head of this household, that he still has authority. He thinks if he can demonstrate control over Victoria's life, I'll withdraw my divorce petition. Patricia, it's not true. It is true, Graham, and everyone in this room knows it now. My mother had stood, gathering her purse, the letters still clutched in her hand. I'm withdrawing as your wife. I'm standing up as Victoria's mother. Something I should have done when she was 8 years old, and you told her girls couldn't be astronauts. Something I should have done when she was 22, and you called her military service an embarrassment. She'd walk to where I stood and press the letters into my hands. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough sooner, sweetheart. But I'm here now. I'd taken the letters, feeling their weight. 14 years of words I'd never received. Love that had been hidden away, like something shameful. My throat had closed up, but I'd managed to whisper 2 words. Thank you, Mom. Judge Dalton had called for a brief recess then, and the courtroom had dissolved into motion and noise. My father had sat frozen in his chair, staring at nothing. Nathan had come to stand beside me, one hand on my shoulder. You okay? Are you? You just testified against Dad. Best thing I ever did. During the recess, I'd stepped into the hallway to breathe. The marble floors and high ceilings made every sound echo. Footsteps, conversations, the distant ring of phones. I'd stood by a tall window, looking out at Norfolk's streets below, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 90 minutes. My mother had approached quietly, the way she'd moved through our house all my life, careful not to disturb, not to take up too much space. Victoria, I need to give you something else. She'd handed me a small wooden box, the kind jewelry came in. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a second compass, identical to the one in my pocket, but this one had an inscription I could read clearly. For Victoria, the only Whitmore who knows true north, love, Nana Beth. Grandmother gave this to me before my last deployment. When did she? She had it engraved the day you enlisted. She told me you were the only one who inherited what mattered. I'd held both objects, the compass from my pocket and this new one from the box, feeling their combined weight settle like ballast. Mom, why didn't you ever say anything all those years? Because I was a coward. Because I was raised to believe good wives supported their husbands no matter what. Because I told myself it was easier to keep peace than to make waves. She touched my cheek, her palm warm and dry. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry. The bailiff had called us back into the courtroom before I could respond. We'd filed back in, taking our places like actors returning for the second act of a play. We were all writing as we went. Judge Dalton had settled into her chair, reviewing papers with the careful attention of someone who took her responsibilities seriously. Before we proceed further, I have a question for Mr. Graham Whitmore. My father had stood, shoulders back, trying to reclaim some dignity. Yes, Your Honor? Are you familiar with your daughter's service record, specifically? She was in the Navy, logistics or something. Or something. The judge had repeated the words like she was tasting them, finding them bitter. You're not certain what your daughter did for 17 years of military service? She never told me details. I assumed it wasn't important. The courtroom had gone very quiet. Even the distant sounds of traffic outside seemed to fade. You assumed wrong, Mr. Whitmore. Let me enlighten you. Judge Dalton had opened a red-tabbed file that had been sitting on her desk since the beginning of the hearing. Your daughter received formal commendation from the Commonwealth of Virginia in 2021. Are you aware of why? No. Let the record show that Lieutenant Commander Victoria L. Whitmore, United States Navy retired, was recognized for exceptional leadership during emergency response operations following Hurricane Sam. I'd felt the room tilt slightly, the way the deck of a ship tilts when you're not expecting it. Hurricane Sam? My father had looked genuinely confused. What hurricane? Hurricane Sam struck coastal Virginia in September 2021. Category 2 storm, unexpected intensification, 8-foot storm surge. Thousands of people were trapped in flooding conditions. The judge had pulled out a document, reading from it in a voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom. Ms. Whitmore, then living in Virginia Beach, coordinated rescue operations that saved 58 civilians over a 72-hour period. She worked with Coast Guard, Virginia National Guard, and local emergency services to establish a command post and systematic evacuation protocol. A woman in the gallery had stood up suddenly. I was there. You're talking about the evacuation, right? The woman who organized everything from that house on the hill? An elderly man had turned in his seat. My daughter called me from Virginia Beach, said a Navy officer saved their entire block. The whispers had spread like ripples, and I'd watched my father's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been the first edge of understanding. You were involved in that? I'd kept my voice level, factual. I was visiting grandmother's house. The storm hit. I helped. Helped. Judge Dalton had repeated the word like my father had, but where his had been questioning, hers was pointed. Ms. Whitmore, I think helped is a significant understatement. The judge had looked at my father one more time, and in her eyes, I'd seen something shift from professional neutrality to something harder. Mr. Whitmore, we'll take a 20-minute recess. When we return, I have additional evidence to present. I suggest you use this time to prepare yourself. She'd stood, and we'd all risen automatically. But my father had remained rooted in place, staring at me like he was seeing someone he'd never met before. I'd walked into the hallway, Nathan beside me, my mother trailing slightly behind. Nathan had handed me a bottle of water without speaking, understanding that sometimes silence was better than platitudes. The hallway had been crowded now, people milling around, some of them watching me with open curiosity. A man in a veteran's cap had approached slowly. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for your service." "Thank you for yours." He'd nodded and walked away, and I'd leaned against the wall, trying to process the last 2 hours. Everything I'd kept private, every achievement I'd never shared, every quiet act of service, all of it was being dragged into the light, examined, judged. She'd pulled out another small box from her purse. She seemed to have an endless supply of them, and opened it. Inside were more letters, but these were older, the paper yellowed with age. "Your grandmother wrote these to you, over the years. Every birthday, every holiday, every time something reminded her of you. Why didn't I get these?" "Because I kept them safe. I knew if your father found them, She'd trailed off, not needing to finish. We both knew what he would have done. I'd taken the box, and on top was a letter addressed in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. The date was from 5 years ago, just weeks before she died. The door at the end of the hallway had opened then, and a woman I didn't recognize had entered with a teenage girl beside her. They'd both looked nervous, the way people do in government buildings when they're not sure they belong. The woman's eyes had scanned the hallway and locked onto me. Her face had changed, recognition flooding across her features like sunrise. "Lieutenant Commander Whitmore?" I'd straightened automatically. "Yes." I had to come. When I heard your name in the news, when I saw this case." She'd reach for the girl's hand, holding it tight. "This is my daughter Emma. I'm Linda Hayes." The name had pulled a memory forward. Floodwater, darkness, a woman's voice screaming for help, a child clinging to a kitchen counter with water rising past her waist. "You remember us, don't you?" Linda's voice had broken slightly. "September 2021, the hurricane. You pulled us out of our apartment." "Mom, is this her?" Emma had whispered, loud enough to carry. "The one who saved us?" "Yes, baby. This is the woman who saved us." My father had emerged from the courtroom then, his attorney beside him, and he'd stopped when he'd seen Linda and Emma. He'd looked from them to me and back again, trying to piece together a story that kept shifting shape. The bailiff had appeared at the courtroom door. "All parties, please return. Court is reconvening." We'd filed back in, but this time Linda and Emma had followed, taking seats in the gallery. I'd watched my father watch them, seen the questions forming behind his eyes. Judge Dalton had returned to the bench, and this time when she'd looked at my father, her expression had been almost gentle. Not kind exactly, but something close to pity. "Mr. Whitmore, before I continue presenting evidence, I need to ask you one more time. Are you certain you want to proceed with this petition?" My father had looked at his attorney, who'd leaned in to whisper urgently. I'd seen Barrett's face, seen the way he'd been shaking his head slightly, and I'd understood that even he, a man paid to argue my father's case, was telling him to walk away. But Graham Whitmore had never walked away from anything in his life. Pride wouldn't let him. Fear of looking weak wouldn't let him. "Yes, Your Honor, I want to proceed." "Very well. Then let's discuss exactly what your daughter has done with her life while you weren't paying attention." Judge Dalton pulled a document from the red-tabbed file, holding it up so the courtroom could see the official seal embossed at the top. Commonwealth of Virginia, Department of Emergency Management. The paper caught the light streaming through the tall windows, and for a moment it seemed to glow. This is a certificate of appreciation issued September 28, 2021. Recipient, Lieutenant Commander Victoria L. Whitmore, United States Navy, retired. Citation reads, for exceptional leadership and coordination during emergency response operations in the aftermath of Hurricane Sam, resulting in the successful evacuation and rescue of 58 civilians under dangerous conditions. My father's face had gone pale, the red flush of anger draining away into something closer to shock. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I don't understand. What hurricane? When was this? The judge set the certificate down with the deliberate care of someone placing the first domino in a chain that would topple everything that came after. Hurricane Sam made landfall on the Virginia coast September 18, 2021. You don't remember? I was in Richmond that week. Business conference. Your daughter was at your mother's beachfront house, the same house you claim she neglected. Judge Dalton's voice carried no judgment, just facts laid bare like bones on a table. The storm intensified unexpectedly. Storm surge reached 8 feet in some areas. Roads became impassable. Communications went down. Emergency services were overwhelmed. A woman in the second row of gallery seats leaned forward, her hand gripping the wooden rail. I recognized her vaguely. Someone from the neighborhood near grandmother's house, maybe. Her voice trembled when she spoke. Your Honor, I was there. I lived 3 streets over. The water came up so fast we couldn't get out. Judge Dalton nodded. Ma'am, if you have relevant testimony, I'll hear it shortly. For now, let me establish the timeline. She pulled out another document, this one stapled and thick. Virginia Beach Emergency Management Report, filed September 22, 2021. I'll read the relevant section. Civilian command post established at 1247 Ocean View Drive by retired Naval Officer V. Whitmore provided critical coordination during peak emergency period. Officer Whitmore organized volunteer rescue teams, established communication protocols with Coast Guard and National Guard units, and maintained detailed logs of evacuated civilians. Command post operational for 72 continuous hours. 0 fatalities in designated rescue zone. My father turned to look at me, really look at me, for the first time since the hearing began. His eyes moved over my uniform, the ribbon rack, the gold stripes on my sleeves, as if seeing them for the first time. 72 hours? Victoria, you were there for 3 days? 4, actually. Cleanup and family reunification took another day. But you never called, you never told us. The words hung between us, exposing the fundamental truth neither of us had wanted to name. He wouldn't have answered even if I had called. We both knew it. The entire courtroom knew it. Judge Dalton's fingers moved across her keyboard, and the large monitor mounted on the wall flickered to life. The Virginia state seal appeared, then dissolved into the archived logo of Wavy TV, Norfolk's NBC affiliate. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to present video evidence obtained from the station's public archive. Proceed. The screen filled with shaky footage shot from inside a news van, rain streaking the windshield, wipers struggling to keep up. A timestamp in the corner read, September 19th, 2021, 14:32. The reporter's voice came through tinny speakers, competing with the sound of wind and rain. We're approaching what residents are calling the Guardian House, where a retired Navy officer has been coordinating rescue operations since early this morning. The camera swung around, focusing on a 2-story beach house sitting on elevated ground, its lights blazing like a lighthouse in the gray afternoon. People moved in and out of the frame, some in orange safety vests, others wrapped in blankets, all soaked to the skin. Then the camera found me. I was standing on the front porch, hair plastered to my head, wearing rain gear over jeans and a navy sweatshirt. A radio was clipped to my shoulder, and I held a laminated map in one hand, marking it with a grease pencil. The woman I'd been speaking to, Coast Guard, based on her uniform, pointed at something on the map, and I nodded, speaking into the radio. The audio was garbled by wind, but subtitles appeared at the bottom of the screen, transcribed from the original broadcast. Roger that, CG2. Family of 4 at that location. Elderly male, possible cardiac issues, priority transport. The reporter approached, microphone extended. The camera zoomed in on my face, and I saw myself as others must have seen me that day, exhausted, focused, operating on adrenaline and training. Ma'am, I'm Lisa Chen with Wavy News. Can you tell us what you're doing here? Coordinating rescue operations with Coast Guard and Virginia National Guard, making sure everyone in the flood zone gets out safely. Residents are calling you the guardian of the coast. How many people have you helped rescue? I'm not rescuing anyone myself. I'm just organizing the volunteers and emergency personnel who are doing the actual work. My voice on the recording sounded hoarse, scraped raw. Current count is 41 evacuated. We have 17 more confirmed locations to check. Your former Navy? Yes, ma'am. Supply Corps, logistics, and humanitarian assistance. This is what we trained for. The camera had panned away from me then, capturing the organized chaos of the operation. Volunteers checking names off lists. Medical personnel triaging injuries. Children wrapped in blankets, crying for parents who'd been separated in the evacuation. The footage cut to different angles. Me carrying an elderly woman through knee-deep water, the woman's arms locked around my neck and her face pressed against my shoulder. Me directing two volunteers with an inflatable raft toward a partially submerged house. Me kneeling beside a child who couldn't have been more than 6, speaking close to her ear while she clutched a stuffed animal. The final clip showed me at hour 68, according to the timestamp. Dawn was breaking, the storm had passed, and I was sitting on the porch steps with my head in my hands. Someone had draped a blanket over my shoulders. The camera caught me from the side, and even through the exhaustion you could see it. The relief that comes when you've carried something heavy for so long that setting it down feels like floating. The screen went dark. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Dalton's voice broke through the quiet, measured, and precise. 58 people, Mr. Whitmore. Your daughter coordinated operations that saved 58 people, including... The judge paused, and something shifted in her expression. Including me. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the bench. September 19th, 2021. I was visiting my sister Margaret in Norfolk. She was in hospice care. End-stage cancer. When the storm surge hit, the facility lost power. They had to evacuate all 23 patients, most of them non-ambulatory. Judge Dalton's voice remained steady, but her hands had tightened on the edge of her desk. I was helping move patients when I fell, hit my head. I don't remember the evacuation itself. I woke up 6 hours later in an emergency shelter with a concussion and 6 stitches. She pulled out a medical record, holding it so we could all see the header. Norfolk Regional Medical Center, Emergency Department. My chart says, patient evacuated from Seaside Hospice under direction of Incident Commander, Lieutenant Commander V. Whitmore. Conscious during transport, unconscious on arrival at shelter. Possible head trauma. I didn't know who V. Whitmore was. The name meant nothing to me. Until today. My father's attorney had gone very still beside him, no longer shuffling papers or whispering advice. Dennis Barrett's face had taken on the waxy quality of someone watching a trial slip away beyond recall. Judge Dalton looked at my father, and in her eyes was something I'd seen before in the faces of people I'd helped during emergencies. A mixture of gratitude and incomprehension at the randomness of survival. While you worried about appearances and reputation, Mr. Whitmore, your daughter was preventing funerals, including, possibly, mine. The words landed like a gavel strike, final and absolute. Movement at the back of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. Linda Hayes stood, her daughter Emma beside her, both of them holding hands like they were bracing against a current. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Dalton nodded. Please approach Ms. Hayes. Linda walked to the front, Emma matching her mother's steps. Up close, I could see details I'd missed in the chaos of that September. The small scar above Linda's left eyebrow, the way she favored her right leg slightly when she walked. Marks left by the storm, carried forward into calmer days. My name is Linda Hayes. This is my daughter Emma. We need to tell you what Lieutenant Commander Whitmore did for us. The bailiff brought her a microphone, and Linda's voice filled the courtroom, stronger than I'd expected. September 19th, 2021. I was 31 years old, working 2 jobs to keep us fed and housed. We lived in a ground-floor apartment in Virginia Beach. 2 bedrooms, cheap rent, and during hurricane season, we knew it was risky. But it was what we could afford. Emma's hand tightened on her mother's, and Linda drew a breath before continuing. The warning said we had time. They were wrong. Water came up fast, 6 feet in 45 minutes. Emma was on the kitchen counter. I was treading water, holding onto the cabinet handles. We were going to die. The courtroom had gone so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on, a distant hum that made the silence feel even deeper. I screamed until my voice was gone. No one came. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs outside, and a woman's voice through the door. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Commander Whitmore, U.S. Navy. I'm here to help." Linda's eyes found mine across the courtroom. She had an inflatable raft and a rope. She assessed the situation in about 3 seconds. Emma first because children always go first, then me. The current was strong. The water was filthy. She made 2 trips through it and she never hesitated. Not once. Emma spoke for the first time, her voice high and young. "I thought I was going to drown. I was 14 and I thought that was how I'd die. But Lieutenant Whitmore climbed through our window and looked at me and said," the girl's voice cracked. She said, "I have a niece your age. You're going to be okay. I promise." I didn't have a niece. I'd said it because scared children need promises, even ones that might be lies. Linda continued. "After the rescue, Lieutenant Whitmore gave us dry clothes, hot food. She stayed with us until my sister could drive down from Richmond, 6 hours of sitting in that house full of scared, traumatized people, making sure everyone was accounted for." She pulled an envelope from her purse, holding it up. 2 weeks later, I received $3,000 through the Red Cross Relief Fund. Anonymous donation. The note said, "For a fresh start, from a friend." I didn't know who. I was living in my sister's spare room, trying to rebuild from nothing. That money meant we could get deposits on a new apartment. It meant Emma could replace her school supplies, her clothes, everything we'd lost. Linda's voice hardened with certainty. "I found out 3 days ago it was Lieutenant Whitmore. I saw her name in the newspaper article about this case, and I called the Red Cross to confirm. The donation came through the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. The donor was Victoria Whitmore." My father's face had gone from pale to gray. He looked at his attorney, but Barrett had nothing to offer. No objection, no strategy, no way to argue against the evidence of simple kindness. Emma stepped forward, still clutching her mother's hand. "Your Honor, can I say something else?" "Of course." Of course. "I'm 17 now, senior year of high school. I got accepted to Old Dominion University for nursing, full scholarship. It came from something called the Whitmore Family Fund." Emma turned to look at me, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know it was you. I thought it was some rich family doing charity. But it was you, wasn't it? You paid for my college." The scholarship had been set up through my grandmother's lawyer, structured to remain anonymous. $20,000 over 4 years, funding Emma's education because I'd seen something in that terrified 14-year-old holding onto a kitchen counter. The kind of strength that, given the chance, would help others the way she'd been helped. "I'm going to be a nurse because of you, because you showed me what it means to save lives, and this man—" Emma's voice shook as she pointed at my father. "This man is trying to say you're incompetent? You saved my mother. You saved me. You gave me a future. How is that incompetent?" Spontaneous applause broke out in the gallery, quickly silenced by the bailiff. But the ripple of support had already moved through the room like wind through grass. Judge Dalton waited for complete silence before speaking. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for your testimony. Please return to your seats." She looked out over the courtroom. "Are there others present who have relevant testimony regarding Ms. Whitmore's actions during Hurricane Sam?" 12 people stood. The courtroom erupted in whispers as they rose one by one. An elderly man with a walker, a young family with a baby, a priest in clerical collar, a police officer in uniform, an elderly black woman who moved slowly but with determination. They stood and they kept standing. 12 people scattered through the gallery, united by a single common thread. I had helped them survive. Judge Dalton's eyebrows rose. "All of you?" The elderly man with the walker spoke, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through enough to know what mattered. "Your Honor, my name is Howard Chen. I'm 78 years old. Lieutenant Commander Whitmore carried me out of my house. I have diabetes. I was in diabetic crisis. She coordinated my helicopter medical evacuation, stayed on the radio with doctors, got me transport to Norfolk General. I'm alive because she wouldn't give up." The young mother with the baby spoke next. "Jennifer Morrison, this is my daughter Claire. She was 6 months old during the hurricane. Lieutenant Whitmore organized our evacuation. All 4 of us, plus our dog. She made sure babies went first. Made sure we had formula and diapers at the shelter." The priest stepped forward. "Father Thomas Reed." I've known the Whitmore family for 40 years. I serve at St. Paul's Episcopal, where Graham and Patricia are members. He looked at my father, and his expression was gentle but unyielding. Graham, I was at that house during the storm. My church flooded. Lieutenant Commander Whitmore let us use her grandmother's house as a command post. She saved 17 of my parishioners. You don't know your own daughter. One by one they spoke. Each testimony was brief but devastating in its specificity. Names, dates, details that couldn't be fabricated or exaggerated. The accumulation of evidence built like a wall, brick by brick, until there was no way through it and no way around it. An elderly woman who'd been sitting near the front stood with the help of a cane. Dorothy Banks, 82 years old. I was bedbound during the storm. Lieutenant Whitmore personally coordinated my medical evacuation. Spent 4 hours on logistics to get me helicopter transport because I couldn't be moved by boat. Mrs. Banks turned to face my father directly. Mr. Whitmore, your daughter is the reason I got to meet my first great-grandchild last month. I should have died in that storm. I'm here because she refused to let that happen. She pointed at him with her cane, and her voice rang with the kind of moral clarity that comes from staring down death and walking away. You should be on your knees thanking God for a daughter like that. Instead, you're suing her? You shame yourself. The courtroom dissolved into murmurs of agreement, quickly hushed by the bailiff but impossible to fully silence. The atmosphere had shifted from judicial proceeding to something closer to public reckoning. Judge Dalton let the moment breathe before calling for order. Thank you all for your testimony. Please be seated. She turned to my father. Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Did you know any of this? My father stood slowly, and I saw for the first time how old he'd become. 80 years sat heavy on his shoulders, pulling them down. His hands trembled when he gripped the table for support. No, I didn't know. Did you ever ask? The question cut clean through every excuse, every rationalization, every defense he might have offered. No, I never asked. The admission fell into the courtroom like a stone into still water. My father sat back down, and I watched something in him collapse. Not his body, but something deeper. The architecture of certainty he'd built his identity around suddenly revealed as hollow. The courtroom door opened again, and a man in a navy dress uniform entered. Captain's insignia gleamed on his collar. Ribbons covered his chest in a rainbow of service and sacrifice. He was 70, maybe, with silver haircut military short, and the bearing of someone who'd commanded others and earned their respect through competence rather than fear. Every veteran in the room recognized him before he spoke. Captain Robert Chen, retired. A legend in Naval Supply Corps circles, the kind of officer junior personnel aspired to become. Judge Dalton's surprise showed for just a moment before professional composure reasserted itself. Captain Chen, I wasn't expecting you. Apologies for the late arrival, Your Honor. Flight from San Diego was delayed. He moved to the front of the courtroom with the economical grace of a man who'd spent decades on ship decks. Permission to testify regarding Lieutenant Commander Whitmore's service record? Granted, please be sworn in. Captain Chen took the oath with his hand steady on the Bible, and when he sat in the witness chair, he looked directly at my father. Mr. Whitmore, I commanded your daughter for 8 years. She was the finest logistics officer I ever served with, and I served for 32 years across 3 wars. He pulled a document from his briefcase, unfolding it with care. This is Victoria Whitmore's service record. It's not classified. Anyone could request it. I'm guessing you never did. My father said nothing. Your daughter enlisted in the Navy on September 14th, 2001. She was 19 years old. The country had just been attacked. She could have gone to college, could have chosen a safer path. She chose service. Captain Chen's voice carried the weight of someone recounting history that mattered. Enlisted as hospital corpsman, combat medic. She deployed to Iraq in 2004, embedded with a Marine infantry unit. She was 22 years old, pulling shrapnel out of Marines under fire. She earned her combat action ribbon at 23. The ribbon was on my chest now, a small strip of cloth that represented the moment when training became reality, and you discovered whether you'd break or bend. She was commissioned as an officer in 2009, top 10% of her officer candidate school class. Her specialty was supply corps, logistics, humanitarian assistance, disaster coordination. The skills that saved 58 people during Hurricane Sam? She learned those serving her country. Captain Chen pulled out another document. Her awards: Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal 3 times, Combat Action Ribbon, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal, NATO Medal, Humanitarian Service Medal twice. He looked up from the paper. The Humanitarian Service Medal is only awarded for direct participation in significant humanitarian operations. Your daughter earned 2. My father's attorney attempted an intervention. Your Honor, while we respect Captain Chen's service, this is character testimony rather than evidence relevant to— It's directly relevant. Judge Dalton cut him off. Mental competency evaluation includes assessment of judgment and decision-making capacity. Captain Chen is establishing a pattern of sound judgment under extreme circumstances. I'll allow it. Captain Chen continued. In 2021, I personally nominated Lieutenant Commander Whitmore for the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal in recognition of her actions during Hurricane Sam. The citation would have read, "For meritorious service in the execution of emergency humanitarian operations, resulting in the preservation of 58 civilian lives under hazardous conditions." He paused, and something like regret crossed his face. She refused the medal. My father's head snapped up. What? Why would she? She said, and I quote from her written response to me, "Sir, I don't want recognition. I want those people to have homes again. If the Navy wants to honor me, donate the award money to local relief efforts." Captain Chen looked at me, and I saw pride and exasperation in equal measure. She turned down a significant military commendation because she thought the money could be better used helping others. He folded the papers and set them on the witness stand. "Mr. Whitmore, you have 3 children, your son Nathan and your daughter Victoria, plus a military legacy you never knew you had. I have 3 sons, all successful, all good men. If one of them had half the character your daughter demonstrates, I'd consider my parenting a triumph." His voice hardened. "You're suing her for incompetence? She coordinated disaster response better than officers with 20 years' experience. She made life or death decisions with calm and precision. The military trusted her with missions that mattered. And you can't trust her to manage a piece of property?" The captain stood, and even in civilian court, his presence commanded respect. "Your Honor, I flew 3,000 miles to tell you this. Victoria Whitmore is one of the finest officers I ever had the privilege to command. Her judgment is sound. Her character is beyond reproach. This petition is an insult to her service and to everyone who served with her." He saluted me, a sharp, precise gesture that carried decades of tradition, and I returned it automatically, 30 years of training overriding the civilian setting. Judge Dalton waited until Captain Chen had taken a seat in the gallery before speaking. "Mr. Whitmore, do you have any response to Captain Chen's testimony?" My father's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I didn't know about any of it. The medals, the deployments, the hurricane. She never told me." "Did you ever ask?" The judge's question was gentle now, almost compassionate, because the answer was obvious to everyone in the room. "No." "Why not?" My father's composure finally broke. Not dramatically, no shouting or tears, but something fundamental gave way. His shoulders sagged, his hands dropped to his lap. "Because I was afraid." The honesty of it caught everyone off guard. Afraid of what? Judge Dalton's voice remained soft, inviting truth. "That if I asked, if I really knew what she was doing, I'd have to admit I was wrong. That I'd pushed away someone extraordinary because she didn't fit the image I wanted." His voice cracked. "That I'd wasted decades on pride and appearances while my daughter was out saving lives." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own breathing, feel my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Judge Dalton pulled out another file, this one thinner. "There's one more matter we need to address. Ms. Whitmore's financial records." My father's attorney seized on the shift. "Your Honor, we've established that Ms. Whitmore performed admirable service, but the issue remains whether she can responsibly manage significant assets given her current circumstances." "Her current circumstances," Judge Dalton repeated, a edge creeping into her voice. "Let's examine those." She pulled out a document I recognized, my tax returns, subpoenaed as part of the competency evaluation. Over the past 14 years, Ms. Whitmore has donated $98,000 to charitable organizations, while living on a military pension that averages $31,000 annually. The math was stark. I'd given away more than 3 years' worth of income. Recipients include Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, $32,000. Hurricane Sam Rebuild Fund, 28,000. Virginia Beach Homeless Veterans Program, 18,000. Anonymous scholarships. She looked up at Emma Hayes. Including Ms. Hayes's education fund, $8,000. My father's face had gone from gray to ashen. 98,000? Victoria, where did you? I lived on half my salary. The rest went where it mattered. Judge Dalton wasn't finished. Regarding the disputed property itself, Ms. Whitmore has paid $31,000 in property taxes over 5 years. $47,000 in hurricane damage repairs. Yes, Mr. Whitmore, the house you claim she neglected was severely damaged in Hurricane Isaias, and your daughter paid out of pocket to repair it. An additional $23,000 in ongoing maintenance. She looked directly at my father. Total financial commitment to the property you claim she's incompetent to manage. $101,000. From a woman living on a disability pension. What have you contributed, Mr. Whitmore? My father had no answer. I have testimony from the property's neighbor, a Mr. Gerald Wilkins, age 73. He states, and I quote, "I see Miss Whitmore at the house every month, sometimes more. She does most of the work herself, painting, yard maintenance, small repairs. She's there more than her grandmother was in the final years. That house is standing because of her." Judge Dalton closed the file. Mr. Whitmore, you petitioned this court claiming your daughter lacks the judgment and stability to manage assets. The evidence shows she has managed them with extraordinary care, while simultaneously donating nearly $100,000 to help others. She has maintained perfect financial records. She has never missed a tax payment. She has never defaulted on any obligation. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench, and her voice dropped to something almost conversational. Let me ask you something, sir. Why didn't she tell you about any of this? The hurricane, the awards, the property maintenance, the charitable giving? My father looked at me finally, and in his eyes I saw the beginning of something that might eventually become understanding. Because I never gave her a reason to trust me with the truth. The words hung in the air like smoke, visible and undeniable. Judge Dalton nodded slowly. That, Mr. Whitmore, is the most honest thing you've said today. She straightened the papers on her desk, aligning them with the precision of someone about to deliver a verdict that would change lives. Before I rule, I want to address one more matter. Ms. Whitmore, would you approach the bench? I walked forward, each step measured, aware of every eye in the courtroom following me. Your grandmother served as a Navy nurse in World War II, is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Pacific Theater. She met my grandfather when he was wounded at Guadalcanal. She was treating casualties on a hospital ship. 3 generations of service. The judge's voice carried respect. Your grandmother, you, and the values you've carried forward. She looked at my father one last time. Mr. Whitmore, while you worried about what people would think, your daughter was living according to principles that actually matter: service, sacrifice, quiet dignity. Judge Dalton glanced at the courtroom clock. It's now 3:47 p.m. We've been in session for over 5 hours. I'm going to take a brief recess before delivering my ruling. 15 minutes. The gavel came down and the room exhaled collectively. I walked back to my seat and Nathan was there immediately, hand on my shoulder. You okay? Are you? You just burned every bridge with Dad. Those bridges were already ash. I just stopped pretending they weren't. My mother approached from the gallery, and for the first time in my memory, she pulled me into a tight embrace. She smelled like the lavender soap she'd used my entire childhood, and the familiarity of it broke something loose in my chest. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I should have said it 40 years ago, but I'm saying it now. Mom. No, let me finish. She pulled back, holding my shoulders, forcing me to meet her eyes. I was 20 when I married your father. I was taught that good wives support their husbands, stay quiet, keep peace. I spent 52 years disappearing. Watching you refuse to disappear terrified me because I thought you'd get hurt. But you didn't. You thrived. And I stayed silent to protect my own comfort, not you. She pressed something into my hand. Another letter. This one addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize at first. Then I looked closer and saw it was my mother's, but younger, less shaky. The date was from 3 years ago. Your grandmother left this with her lawyer. Instructions to give it to you when the time was right. I think today is that time. I unfolded the paper and my grandmother's voice spoke across 5 years of silence. My darling Victoria, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're facing something difficult. Probably involving your father. He means well, but he's terrified of anything he can't control. You terrified him from the moment you were born. So fierce, so certain, so completely yourself. This compass belonged to me during the war. I kept it when everything else was lost. It taught me that true north doesn't change, even when the world spins beneath you. True north is integrity, service, love that demands nothing in return. Asterisk. You found your true north early. Follow it, even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. I'm proud of the woman you've become. I only wish your father could see what I see. Perfection doesn't need to be created or controlled. Sometimes it just needs to be recognized. All my love, Nana Beth. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket. The weight of it pressed against my chest, over my heart. Linda Hayes approached hesitantly, Emma beside her. Lieutenant Commander, I hope it was okay that we came. When I saw the news article about the lawsuit, I had to. You didn't have to do anything, but I'm grateful you did. Emma stepped forward, brave in the way only teenagers can be when they believe in something absolutely. Ma'am, you told me I was going to be okay. In the flood, when I thought I was dying, you promised. Her voice steadied. You kept that promise, and because you did, I'm going to keep a promise too. I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to save people the way you saved us. I'm going to make that scholarship worth it. Emma, you already have. The bailiff called us back to order. We filed in, taking our positions. And this time when my father looked at me, there was something different in his expression. Not love, not quite. That would take time we hadn't had. But recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that he'd been looking at a stranger for decades when he should have been seeing his daughter. Judge Dalton returned to the bench, and the courtroom fell silent. I've been on this bench for 19 years. I've heard hundreds of cases involving family disputes, asset management, competency evaluations. This case is unique, and not in a way that reflects well on the petitioner. She looked at my father with an expression that mixed disappointment and something almost like pity. Mr. Whitmore, you came into my courtroom claiming your daughter lacks the mental capacity and judgment to manage assets. You presented her PTSD diagnosis as evidence of incompetence. You cited her lifestyle choices as proof of instability. The judge pulled out the stack of evidence that had accumulated over 5 hours. The evidence tells a different story. It tells the story of a woman who has managed significant financial obligations with perfect precision, who has maintained property you abandoned, who has donated nearly $100,000 to charitable causes while living modestly, who coordinated disaster response that saved 58 lives, who served her country with distinction for 17 years and earned the respect of decorated officers. She picked up Captain Chen's testimony. It tells the story of someone whose judgment under pressure exceeds that of most people I've encountered, including many who sit on this bench. It tells the story of quiet competence, selfless service, and moral clarity. Judge Dalton set the papers down and looked directly at my father. The only incompetence I see in this courtroom, sir, is your inability to recognize your daughter's worth. The words fell like a sentence, final and complete. Petition for declaration of incompetence. Denied with prejudice. Ms. Victoria Whitmore retains full legal capacity and control of all assets. Mr. Graham Whitmore is ordered to pay all court costs and fees associated with this proceeding. The gavel came down. However, Judge Dalton raised her voice slightly over the murmurs. There is one more matter I must address for the record. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore filed for divorce 3 months ago. That petition is separate from these proceedings, but I believe the evidence presented today may inform her decision. My father turned to look at my mother in the gallery. She stood, and her voice carried across the courtroom with a steadiness that 40 years of silence had been building toward. I'm not withdrawing the petition, Graham. This case proved exactly why I need to leave. She walked toward the exit, and for a moment I thought my father would let her go without a word. Then his voice cracked through the silence. Patricia, please. She stopped but didn't turn around. 52 years, Graham? I gave you 52 years to choose your children over your pride. You chose wrong every time. I can't give you any more. She walked out, and the door closing behind her sounded like punctuation on a sentence that had been incomplete for half a century. My father stood there, watching the door, and then something happened I'd never seen in my entire life. His legs buckled. Not dramatically, not like fainting, but like someone had cut the strings holding him upright. He sat down hard, and his hand went to his chest. I can't breathe. Dennis Barrett jumped up, grabbing my father's arm. Graham, look at me. Are you having pain? Someone call 911. A voice from the gallery, maybe Father Reed. I was moving before I thought about it, training overriding every other consideration. I reached my father in 4 strides, kneeling beside his chair. Dad, look at me. Focus on my voice. His eyes found mine, wide with fear and something else. Confusion, maybe, at hearing me call him Dad after 14 years of first-name distance. My chest, it's tight, can't catch my breath. I checked his pulse. Rapid, irregular. His face had gone pale and clammy. Likely cardiac event. We need EMS here now. Linda Hayes appeared beside me, already pulling medical equipment from her purse. She'd been an EMT for 3 years, trained in the aftermath of the hurricane that had changed her life. I've got a pulse ox, BP cuff in the car. I'll grab it. Go. I loosened my father's tie, helped him lean forward slightly to ease breathing. His hand found mine, gripping with surprising strength. Don't leave me. The words were barely a whisper, but they carried decades of unspoken fear. I won't, Dad, I've got you. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Linda returned with her blood pressure cuff, and we worked in concert, checking vitals, monitoring, keeping him stable until the EMTs could arrive. The ambulance crew rushed in with practiced efficiency. I gave them the vital signs we'd collected, briefed them on his medical history as much as I knew it, which wasn't much because I'd never asked either. Family riding along? I am. I didn't look to see if anyone objected. They loaded him onto the gurney, and I climbed into the ambulance beside him. Through the rear windows, I could see the courthouse receding, Nathan and my mother rushing for their car to follow, Judge Dalton standing at the entrance watching us go. In the ambulance, my father's eyes found mine again. I was afraid you'd leave me, like everyone else. Who else left you, Dad? My father. Died when I was 19. My brother. We haven't spoken in 40 years. Everyone I couldn't control found a way to escape. His voice was thin, scraped raw by pain and revelation. I thought if I held tight enough, if I made you need my approval, you'd stay. You had it backward. The tighter you held, the more I had to leave to breathe. I know that now. His hand tightened on mine. Too late, but I know. The EMT glanced at me, and I shook my head slightly. Not the time to tell him to stop talking, to conserve energy. Sometimes people need to speak more than they need silence. I'm sorry, for all of it. For making you small when you were born to be big. For calling your service embarrassing when it was heroic. For suing you when I should have been thanking you. Dad! Let me say it, while I can, while it still matters. His breathing was labored but determined. You're the best thing I ever had a hand in creating, and I spent your whole life trying to destroy it because it scared me. That's my shame, not yours. Never yours. The ambulance pulled into Norfolk General's emergency bay. Doors flew open, and my father was wheeled away into the organized chaos of triage. A nurse stopped me at the entrance to the treatment area. Are you family? I'm his daughter. Wait here. We'll update you as soon as we can. I stood in the hallway, still in my dress whites, and waited. Nathan and my mother arrived 15 minutes later, breathless and scared. How is he? They're running tests, possible heart attack. We won't know more for a while. We sat in the waiting room. 3 people bound by blood and history and damage that might or might not be reparable. My mother held my hand on one side, Nathan's on the other, and we waited in the particular silence that exists only in hospitals, where hope and fear exist in equal measure. An hour later, a doctor emerged, young, tired, professional. Family of Graham Whitmore? We stood as one. He's stable. It was a mild heart attack, stress-induced. No major damage to the heart muscle. We're keeping him overnight for observation, but his prognosis is good. The doctor looked at each of us in turn. However, he's going to need significant lifestyle changes, stress management, medication, possibly therapy. Can we see him? One at a time. He's sedated but awake. My mother looked at me. You should go first. He asked for you. I walked into the room where my father lay connected to machines that beeped steady reassurance. His eyes were half closed, but they opened when I entered. You stayed. I said I would. He reached for my hand and I let him take it. In the ambulance, what I said, I meant it. All of it. I know. Can you forgive me? I thought about the question, turning it over carefully. Forgiveness wasn't a light switch. Not for damage this deep, this old, but it could be a direction. A heading held steady even when the waters were rough. I'm working on it. Some days I think I can, some days I know I can't. But I'm here. That means something. It means everything. His eyes closed, and his breathing deepened into something that might have been sleep, or might have been the body's way of shutting down everything except healing. I sat with him until visiting hours ended, until the nurse gently told me I needed to leave, until the only sounds were machines and breathing, and the quiet work of survival. Outside in the parking lot, under streetlights that turned the night orange, Nathan and my mother waited by their cars. He's sleeping, they say he'll be okay. Nathan nodded. What happens now? Now we go home. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next. My mother hugged me, fierce and tight. Thank you for staying with him. You didn't have to. No, but it's who I am. I drove home through Norfolk streets, past the courthouse where truth had finally stood on its own feet, past the neighborhoods where I'd organized rescues 3 years ago, past the shipyards where I'd first reported for duty at 19. The city held my history in its streets and waterways, every corner a memory of becoming. Anchor was waiting at the door when I got home, his tail thumping against the floor. I changed out of my dress whites, hung them carefully in the closet, and sat on the back porch with my dog's head in my lap. Tomorrow, my father would wake up in a hospital bed and face a choice: change or die alone. Tomorrow, my mother would decide whether 52 years of marriage was worth one last attempt at resurrection. Tomorrow, I would visit the property my grandmother left me and decide what legacy really meant. But tonight, I sat under Virginia stars and let the weight of truth finally settle. Some things didn't change. Some things you could count on even when everything else shifted beneath your feet. And I was exactly where I needed to be. 3 days after the heart attack, my father was cleared to go home. The hospital discharged him with instructions that read like a complete life overhaul: cardiac rehabilitation, stress management classes, medication schedules measured in hours rather than days. The cardiologist had been blunt in a way that physicians reserve for patients who need shock more than comfort. Mr. Whitmore, your body just gave you a warning. Next time, it might not be so polite. I drove him from Norfolk General to the house he'd shared with my mother for 43 years, pulling into the circular driveway that announced prosperity to anyone passing by. The azaleas were blooming pink and white, maintained by landscapers my father paid but never met. Everything about the property whispered money and good taste and careful curation, everything except the silence that filled it now. My mother had prepared the guest room downstairs, moving his things from the master bedroom they'd shared for half a century. The separation was temporary, she'd explained over the phone, just until they figured out what came next. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when neither party knows how to cross the distance. My father moved slowly up the walkway, one hand pressed to his chest like he was checking to make sure his heart was still there. I carried his overnight bag, watching him navigate his own front steps with the hesitance of someone visiting a museum, careful not to disturb anything, uncertain of his welcome. Inside, my mother waited in the foyer. She'd aged in the past 72 hours, new lines settling around her mouth and eyes. Fear does that, carves itself into your face when you think you might lose something before you've decided whether you want to keep it. Graham. Her voice was steady but careful, the way you'd speak to a wild animal that might bolt. Patricia. They stood 3 feet apart, an ocean of marble tile between them, and I saw the entire architecture of their marriage in that distance, close enough to reach, far enough to retreat. I'll leave you two to talk. I set the bag down and turned toward the door. My father's voice stopped me. Victoria, could you stay, just for a few minutes? I looked at my mother. She nodded once, brief and uncertain. We moved to the living room, that formal space reserved for guests and holidays, where the furniture was beautiful and uncomfortable in equal measure. My father lowered himself into a wingback chair, with the cautious movements of someone whose body had betrayed him. My mother and I took the sofa, sitting at opposite ends like bookends holding up air. The doctors say I need therapy. My father's hands gripped the armrests, knuckles pale. Not just for the heart, for everything else. My mother's fingers twisted in her lap. What kind of therapy? Individual counseling, and they recommended marriage counseling if you're willing. The if hung in the air, fragile and desperate. I don't know if I'm willing, Graham. I don't know if 52 years of silence can be fixed with a few sessions and some helpful worksheets. I'm not asking you to promise anything, I'm asking if you'll try. With me. One more time. My mother turned to look at me, and in her eyes, I saw a question she couldn't quite form. Permission, maybe. Or validation that walking away wouldn't make her a failure. Mom, this isn't about me, it's about what you need. I know. But you left when you couldn't breathe here anymore. Did I wait too long to do the same? The question hit harder than she probably intended. I thought about all the years I'd watched her disappear into my father's expectations, piece by piece, until she was more ghost than person. About the way she'd stood silent when I needed her voice. About how leaving had saved me, but abandoning her had cost something too. You're asking now, that's what matters. She nodded slowly, then turned back to my father. 6 months. I'll give you 6 months of therapy, individual and couples. But I'm keeping the divorce papers filed. If you haven't changed by then, if this is just performance to keep me here, I'm done. No second chances after that. Thank you. The words came out rough, scraped raw. That's more than I deserve. Yes, my mother agreed. It is. I left them there. Two people trying to find their way back to each other through decades of accumulated damage. The front door closed behind me with the solid thunk of expensive wood, and I stood on the steps, breathing air that felt cleaner for being outside. My phone buzzed. Nathan. How'd it go? They're trying. That's something. Want to grab coffee? I need to talk to you about something. Waterside Cafe, 30 minutes? See you there. The cafe sat on the Norfolk waterfront, all exposed brick and local art, the kind of place that served complicated coffee drinks with names that required explanation. Nathan was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 mugs steaming in front of him. He'd ordered for me, black coffee with 1 sugar, the way I'd taken it since I was 20, and he'd been the one to teach me that caffeine was survival in college. You remembered. I slid into the chair across from him. Some things stick. He wrapped both hands around his mug like he was trying to warm something deeper than skin. How's Dad? Scared, which is probably good for him. And Mom? Braver than I've ever seen her. She's giving him 6 months to prove he can change. Nathan nodded, absorbing this. Then he pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, setting it on the table between us. I need to show you something, and I need your advice. Inside was a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery. I recognized the letterhead. Morrison and Associates, the law firm where Nathan had spent 30 years building a career he'd hated. They're offering me senior partner, full equity stake, corner office, the whole package. I looked up at him. That's what you turned down when you left to work at Habitat for Humanity. Different version of it, but yeah, basically the same golden handcuffs. He took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the heat. The senior partner who blocked my promotion back then retired last month. New management wants me back. They're offering 3 times what Habitat pays. Do you want to go back? That's the question, isn't it? He turned the mug in slow circles on the table. Part of me wants to prove I could do it, that I'm good enough for the corner office and the equity and all the external validation Dad always wanted. And the other part knows that I'm happier building homes for families who need them than I ever was building contracts for clients who didn't. I pulled the letter toward me, scanning the offer. The numbers were staggering. Salary, bonuses, benefits that came with the kind of job that consumed your life and called it opportunity. What does Mark think? He said it's my choice, but he reminded me why I left in the first place. Nathan leaned back, shoulders slumping. When I came out to Dad and he disowned me, I thought, what else am I carrying for him? What else am I pretending to be that isn't actually me? And corporate law was part of the pretending. All of it was pretending. The suits, the billable hours, the networking lunches where everyone performed success while drowning in quiet misery. I was good at it. I made partner at 38, which was fast, but I hated every minute. I pushed the letter back toward him. Then you already know the answer. Maybe I need permission to turn it down again. Or maybe I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy for choosing meaning over money. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We Whitmores aren't known for healthy relationships with parental approval. No, we're not. But you already proved you don't need Dad's approval when you chose Habitat. This is different. How? You're not running from anything this time. You're just choosing what you want. There's power in that. Nathan folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. I'm going to decline. Tell them thanks, but I'm exactly where I need to be. Good. We sat in comfortable silence, watching tourists wander the waterfront, couples holding hands, families navigating strollers and toddlers, and the controlled chaos of trying to enjoy themselves. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the particular damage that came from loving someone who saw your existence as a problem to solve. I talked to Mark about something else too. Nathan's voice had changed, gone softer. We're thinking about getting married, legally, I mean. We've been together 8 years, it feels like time. That's wonderful. Would you come if we do it? I know it'll be small, Mark's family, a few friends, but I'd want you there. Nathan, of course I'll be there. You're my brother. His eyes got bright, and he looked away quickly, blinking against emotion that men our age were taught to hide. Dad won't come. Even if he's in therapy, even if he's trying, he won't be ready for that. Then he'll miss something important. That's his loss, not yours. I spent 6 years being angry about that. About him missing things. About having to celebrate alone. Nathan's voice steadied. But you know what? I'm done waiting for him to show up. I'm going to build a life worth living whether he's part of it or not. That's the healthiest thing I've heard anyone in this family say in 40 years. We finished our coffee and walked the waterfront, talking about lighter things, his latest habitat project, Anchor's arthritis, the way Norfolk had changed since we were kids. Easy conversation that reminded me family didn't have to be heavy, that blood could connect without strangling. When I got home, Anchor greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, which at 12 years old meant lifting his head and thumping his tail twice before settling back into sleep. I sat on the floor beside him, scratching behind his ears, and pulled out my phone. There was a voicemail from my grandmother's estate lawyer, a man named Howard Chen, no relation to Captain Chen, who'd been handling the beachfront property since she died 5 years ago. Ms. Whitmore, I have the documents ready for your review. The trust structure you outlined for the scholarship fund is sound, but we need to discuss some specifics. Call me when you have a chance. I'd been thinking about the property for weeks now, ever since the court case had forced me to consider what it actually represented. Not just land and money, but legacy. The question of what we leave behind when we're gone, and whether it matters that anyone remembers. My grandmother had left me that house knowing my father would fight it. She'd been clear in her will. Victoria is the only one who understands what truly matters. At the time, I thought she meant I understood family history, or the value of that particular piece of land. But sitting on my kitchen floor with an aging dog, I understood what she'd really meant. She'd given me permission to do what she couldn't, break the cycle of Whitmore men controlling Whitmore money, using wealth as leverage and inheritance as control. I called Howard Chen back. Ms. Whitmore, thanks for getting back to me. I've drafted the trust documents according to your specifications. The Whitmore Hayes Maritime Scholarship Fund, dedicated to supporting children of military families and disaster survivors pursuing careers in emergency services, medical fields, or maritime professions. That's right, what do we need to discuss? The property value. Current appraisal came in at $1.6 million, up from the $1.4 we estimated last year. If we sell and invest the proceeds conservatively, we can fund approximately $60,000 in scholarships annually. If we lease the property and maintain it as a retreat center for veterans, we'll have less liquid capital but ongoing operational expenses. I thought about the house sitting empty most of the year, holding memories but serving no one. About all the money I'd poured into maintaining it for a future that was really just the past, refusing to let go. Sell it. Use the proceeds for the scholarship fund. Set aside enough for a small retreat center somewhere else. Something we can actually operate, not just maintain. You're certain it's your family home? It's a house. Family is something different. Howard Chen made a sound that might have been approval. I'll start the sale process. We'll need to establish the board of directors for the fund. You mentioned your brother Nathan, Linda Hayes from Virginia Beach, and Captain Chen? Add Father Thomas Reed from St. Paul's Episcopal. He knows the community, and he understands what we're trying to do. Consider it done. One more thing. Your father asked if he could be involved. He called my office yesterday. The request didn't surprise me, but its timing did. 3 days out of the hospital, and he was already trying to rebuild bridges. He can join the board, but he has to attend every meeting, listen to every scholarship recipient's story, and actually do the work, no honorary positions. I'll make that clear when I call him back. After we hung up, I sat with the decision, feeling its weight. Giving away over $1 million should have hurt more, should have felt like loss. Instead, it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Anchor lifted his head and looked at me with brown eyes that had seen combat and retirement and the slow surrender to age. He knew something about letting go, of youth, of strength, of the certainty that tomorrow would look like today.
We're doing the right thing, aren't we, boy?
His tail thumped once against the floor, close enough to agreement. The next Sunday, I attended services at St. Paul's Episcopal for the first time in 15 years. The building looked exactly as I remembered. Gray stone, tall steeple, stained glass windows that threw colored light across the pews when the sun hit right. I'd been baptized here, confirmed here, and eventually stopped coming here when the hypocrisy of sitting in the same row as my father, while he pretended to love his neighbor, became too much to stomach. Father Reed had called me 3 days earlier. Your father asked if he could speak to the congregation about what happened in court, about his apology to you and Nathan. Why are you calling me? Because I wanted to make sure you knew, and because I wanted to ask if you'd be there, not for him, for yourself. I'd thought about declining. The idea of watching my father perform contrition in front of 300 people who'd known us for decades made my skin crawl. But Father Reed's voice had carried something else. Not pressure, but invitation. I'll come, but I'm sitting in the back, now sliding into a rear pew. I understood why he'd wanted me there. The church was packed. Word had spread about the court case. Small towns have no secrets. And people had come to witness either redemption or humiliation. Maybe both. My mother sat in the front row, dressed simply in navy blue. Nathan and Mark were beside her, and the sight of them together in a church where Nathan had once been told he wasn't welcome felt like its own small revolution. Father Reed took the pulpit for announcements, moving through the usual parish business, bake sales, volunteer schedules, prayers for the sick. Then his voice changed, dropped into something more serious. This morning, we have something unusual. A member of our parish has asked to address you all. Some of you know that Graham Whitmore was recently involved in a court case with his daughter. Some of you know the outcome. Graham has asked to speak about that experience, and I've granted permission. He stepped aside, and my father walked to the pulpit, 80 years old, thinner after the heart attack, moving with the deliberate care of someone whose body had recently reminded him of its mortality. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the first time I'd seen him in public without one. The informality felt like nakedness. He stood at the pulpit and gripped its edges, knuckles going white. I stand before you not as Graham Whitmore, retired CEO, or as anyone deserving of your respect. I stand as someone who failed. His voice cracked on the word and he paused, swallowing hard. 52 years ago, I married Patricia. I promised to honor her. For 52 of those years, I treated her as an accessory, something to display, not someone to cherish. I stole her voice and called it marriage. My mother's shoulders trembled, but she didn't turn around. 38 years ago, my daughter Victoria was born. I should have celebrated. Instead, I spent her entire childhood trying to make her smaller, quieter, more acceptable. When she joined the Navy at 19, I called it embarrassment. The truth is, she terrified me. A woman who knew her own mind, who chose service over status. I didn't know what to do with that except try to diminish it. People were shifting in their pews now, uncomfortable with this level of honesty delivered from a pulpit, usually reserved for measured sermons and comfortable platitudes. My son Nathan built a successful career in corporate law. When he chose to leave it to work at Habitat for Humanity, when he told me he was gay and in love with Mark, I disowned him. For 6 years, I told people he was too busy to visit. The truth is, I couldn't accept that he'd chosen authenticity over my approval. Nathan's hand found Mark's, their fingers lacing together in full view of a congregation that had once suggested their love was sin. 3 weeks ago, I sued my daughter. I claimed she was mentally incompetent to manage assets. I presented her PTSD diagnosis as evidence of weakness. My father's voice grew stronger, fed by the momentum of confession. The court revealed what I'd refused to see. Victoria coordinated rescue operations during Hurricane Sam that saved 58 people. She donated nearly $100,000 to charity while living on a military pension. She maintained property I'd abandoned. She served her country with distinction and earned the respect of officers who'd seen combat across 3 wars. He pulled out papers from his jacket pocket, wrinkled, worn, clearly handled many times. These are letters from survivors of the hurricane, from families she helped, from people whose lives she saved while I complained that her career was embarrassing. His hand shook as he set the papers on the pulpit. I came here today because I need to say this publicly. Not to perform penance, but to speak truth. He looked directly at my mother for the first time. Patricia, I stole 52 years from you. I made you invisible while demanding you support me. I'm sorry. Then he found Nathan in the crowd. Nathan, I told you your love was shameful when the only shame was my inability to celebrate who you are. I'm sorry. Finally, his eyes searched the back of the church until they found mine. Victoria, I spent your life trying to destroy the strength I should have nurtured. I called your service embarrassing when I should have called it heroic. I'm sorry. He gripped the pulpit harder, and I saw it cost him something to keep standing. I don't expect forgiveness. Apologies don't erase damage, but I owe you all the truth. I built a life on reputation and discovered it was hollow. My daughter built a life on service and it saved people. The difference between us is the difference between appearance and substance. He stepped back from the pulpit, and Father Reed moved forward to help him down. The church sat in stunned silence. Not the comfortable quiet of reverence, but the shocked stillness of people processing something unexpected. Then Father Reed began to clap. Slow, measured applause that echoed in the vaulted space. A few people joined, not many at first, but enough. My mother stood and turned to face the congregation, tears streaming down her face, and applauded her husband of 52 years for finally telling the truth. Nathan and Mark stood next. Then Linda Hayes, who'd driven from Virginia Beach with Emma to witness this. Then others, scattered through the pews, building to something that wasn't quite approval but might have been acknowledgement. I stayed seated, not out of spite, but because standing would have meant endorsing something I wasn't ready to endorse. My father had spoken truth, but truth spoken in church on Sunday was easy. Truth lived out on Tuesday when no one was watching. That was the test. After the service, people clustered in small groups, voices low and intense. I slipped out the side door, but my mother caught me in the parking lot. You didn't stand? No. Are you angry? I thought about the question. Anger would have been simpler, cleaner. What I felt was more complicated. A mixture of hope and skepticism wound so tightly together I couldn't separate them. I'm cautious. Words in front of an audience are performance. I need to see what happens when the audience goes home. That's fair. She touched my arm, gentle and uncertain. He started therapy, individual sessions twice a week. We have our first couples session tomorrow. How do you feel about that? Terrified. Like I might be wasting time on something that can't be fixed. Or worse, that I'll realize it can be fixed and I just don't want to anymore. The honesty of it caught me off guard. My mother had spent 52 years hiding her truth, and now it was spilling out in parking lots and courtrooms and spaces that weren't designed to hold it. Either way, you'll know. That's worth something. She nodded, squeezed my arm once, and walked back toward the church where my father waited. I watched her go, this woman who'd finally found her voice at 78, and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. 3 months passed. Autumn came to Norfolk with cooler nights and leaves that turned the streets gold and red. I watched my father navigate therapy with the same grim determination he'd once applied to quarterly earnings reports. Dr. Sarah Kim, his therapist, called it productive discomfort, the process of unlearning 70 years of emotional patterns and trying to build new ones. The couples counseling sessions were harder. My mother reported them in careful detail over weekly lunches we'd started sharing, her way of rebuilding what should have been built decades ago. Yesterday, the therapist asked Graham to name 3 things he appreciated about me that had nothing to do with how I looked or what I did for him. He couldn't answer, just sat there for 20 minutes, silent. What did you do? I left, told him when he could answer the question, he could call me. Did he call? That night, at 2 in the morning, left a voicemail. She pulled out her phone, pressed play. My father's voice, rough with exhaustion or emotion or both. Patricia, 3 things. You're brave in ways I never recognized. You stayed when leaving would have been easier. You found your voice when I'd spent 50 years stealing it. Call me back when you're ready. My mother's eyes were wet when she looked up from the phone. It's not enough. 3 things after 52 years isn't enough, but it's more than he's ever given me. Nathan's wedding happened on a Saturday in October, small ceremony in Mark's parents' backyard. 30 guests who actually loved them instead of 300 who felt obligated to attend. I stood as Nathan's witness, and Mark's sister stood as his. The ceremony was simple, vows written by them, exchanged under a maple tree going brilliant orange. My father didn't come. My mother did, wearing lavender and crying through the entire ceremony. Afterward, she pulled Nathan aside. "I'm sorry he's not here. I'm sorry I'm not enough to make up for that. Mom, you're here, that's everything." I watched them embrace, watched 52 years of maternal silence trying to transform into presence, and felt the particular ache that comes from witnessing healing you wished had started sooner. The scholarship fund officially launched in late October. We'd sold grandmother's property for $1.6 million and established the trust with clear guidelines. Priority given to children of military families and disaster survivors. Renewable scholarships for students pursuing emergency services, medical or maritime careers. The launch event was held at the Maritime Museum in Norfolk, understated and meaningful. Linda Hayes spoke about being rescued and wanting to pass that forward. Captain Chen talked about the importance of service. Father Reed gave a blessing that somehow avoided being preachy. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief. My grandmother served as a Navy nurse in World War II. She taught me that legacy isn't what you leave to people. It's what you leave in them. This fund honors that lesson. We're not giving money. We're investing in people who'll save other people. That's legacy that actually matters. Emma Hayes was our first recipient, $20,000 for her nursing degree at Old Dominion. She accepted the check with shaking hands and a speech she'd clearly practiced. 3 years ago, I thought I'd die in a flood. Lieutenant Commander Whitmore saved me. Then she gave me education without knowing I was the same girl. That's the kind of person I want to become. Someone who helps without needing credit, who saves lives and asks for nothing back. 5 other recipients joined her. Children of veterans, survivors of coastal flooding, young people who'd chosen service careers despite the pressure to choose profit. Each one represented a version of the life my father had wanted me to reject, and my grandmother had celebrated. My father attended the event but sat in the back, watching without speaking. Afterward, he approached me carefully, like I was a wild animal that might startle. "Victoria, the scholarship fund, it's extraordinary." "Thank you. I'd like to contribute. Financially, I mean, not just the board position." "Why?" The question came out harsher than I'd intended, but I needed to know. Was this guilt? Performance? Actual growth? Because you're doing what I should have done with my wealth years ago. You're making it matter. He paused, choosing words carefully. My therapist asked what I wanted my legacy to be. I didn't have an answer. Watching you tonight, I think I'm starting to understand what the question even means. You can contribute, but no plaques with your name, no recognition, anonymous donations only. Agreed. He walked away, and Nathan appeared at my elbow. That was hard for him, offering help without wanting credit. Good. Hard is what he needs. 6 months after the heart attack, my mother made her decision. She called me on a Sunday evening, voice steady and certain. "I'm staying, not because therapy fixed everything, but because I can see him trying, real trying, not performance." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm sure enough to give it more time. We're selling this house, too many bad memories in these walls. Buying something smaller, something that's ours instead of his."
That's a big change.
I'm 78 years old. If I don't make big changes now, when will I? The logic was sound, but I heard something else underneath. Fear that choosing herself might mean being alone, mixed with hope that choosing herself might mean finally being seen. "Mom, whatever you decide, I'm here. You're not alone in this." "I know, sweetheart. That makes all the difference." 1 year after the courtroom, the scholarship fund held its first annual award ceremony. By then, we'd grown to 12 recipients, funded $65,000 in scholarships, and established ourselves as a legitimate organization. The ceremony was held at St. Paul's Episcopal. Father Reed had donated the space, and more than 400 people attended. I sat in the front row this time, between my mother and Nathan. Mark sat on Nathan's other side, legally married and openly acknowledged. My father sat at the end of the row, close enough to be included, but respecting the boundary that still existed. Emma Hayes spoke again, now a college freshman thriving in her nursing program. "Last year, Lieutenant Commander Whitmore told me legacy is what you leave in people, not what you leave to them. I'm carrying that forward, Every patient I help, every life I touch, is proof that saving one person creates ripples that never stop. Marcus Rodriguez, Officer Rodriguez's son, had just completed his first year at the Coast Guard Academy. He spoke about service and sacrifice, about learning that strength came from protecting others, not dominating them. The new recipients were announced. 8 more students, more lives touched, more futures secured. Each name read aloud felt like an answer to the question my father had asked months ago about legacy. This was what mattered, not buildings with brass plaques, but people equipped to serve. When the ceremony ended, people lingered, talking and connecting. Linda Hayes approached with a man I didn't recognize, 50, kind eyes, wearing scrubs. Lieutenant Commander, this is David Chen. He's one of the ER doctors who treated your father after his heart attack. We shook hands and Dr. Chen smiled. I wanted to meet you. Your father talks about you constantly during his cardiac rehab sessions. The other patients are probably sick of hearing about his daughter, the Navy hero. He does? Every session. How you coordinated a disaster response, how you saved lives, how he didn't know and should have. Dr. Chen's expression turned more serious. I'm not a therapist, but I've seen enough patients post-cardiac event to know the ones who change and the ones who perform. Your father is changing. It's slow, it's painful, but it's real. After he walked away, my father appeared, moving carefully through the crowd. Victoria, can we talk just for a minute? We stepped outside into October evening air that smelled like fallen leaves and coming winter. The church bells chimed 6 times, marking the hour. I wanted to give you something. He pulled a small box from his pocket, wooden and worn. Inside was a second compass, similar to my grandmother's, but new. He opened it, and on the back was an engraving, recent enough that the brass still gleamed. To Victoria, you found true north. Now others will follow. Dad, 2025. My throat closed up, making words impossible. Your grandmother was right. You're the only one who understood what truly matters. I'm just sorry it took me 80 years to see it. I took the compass, feeling its weight settle into my palm. 2 different compasses, 2 different kinds of recognition. Thank you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know apologies don't erase damage. He looked at me directly, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Not pride exactly, but respect. But I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you, not despite who you are, but because of it. The words I'd waited 38 years to hear landed in the space between us. Too late to fix the past, but early enough to shape whatever future we might build. I'm working on forgiveness. Some days I can, some days I can't, but I'm here. That counts for something. It counts for everything. We stood there as the sun set over Norfolk, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside, people celebrated new beginnings funded by letting go of old endings. My mother laughed at something Father Reed said. Nathan and Mark held hands without hiding. Emma Hayes talked to the newest scholarship recipients about service and sacrifice, and the ripples one saved life could create. My father hadn't transformed into someone new. He was still rigid in ways therapy couldn't touch, still struggled with Nathan's marriage, still defaulted to control when fear got too loud. But he was trying, showing up to scholarship meetings, listening to recipients, asking questions instead of giving answers. My mother was building a life that included him, but didn't revolve around him. She'd started painting, watercolors of the Norfolk Harbor, boats and water and light captured in ways words never could. The guest room had become her studio, and she spent hours there while my father navigated his own recovery in other parts of the house. Nathan and Mark had bought a small house in Ghent, Norfolk's arts district, and were talking about adoption. Maybe a child who needed a family the way Nathan had once needed acceptance. And me? I volunteered at the VA hospital, helped run the scholarship fund, and spent evenings on my porch with an aging dog. That night, I drove to the empty lot where grandmother's beach house had stood. New owners were building something modern, all glass and steel, nothing like the weathered wood structure that had sheltered 58 people during a hurricane. Progress erasing history, the way it always does. But standing on the beach, listening to waves roll in with the rhythm that predated property lines and family feuds, I understood what my grandmother had really left me. Not a house, not money, though both had mattered. She'd left me permission. Permission to choose service over status. meaning over money, authenticity over approval. Anchor walked beside me along the shoreline, slower than he used to be, but still willing to follow wherever I led. His muzzle had gone completely gray, and the vet had started talking about quality of life in the gentle way veterinarians do when time is running short. "We did good, didn't we, boy? All of it. The Navy, the hurricane, even the courtroom. We did good." His tail wagged once, steady and certain. The beach was quiet this time of night, just the sound of water and wind and the distant call of gulls settling for evening. I found the spot where the porch had been, where I'd stood with a radio and a map coordinating rescues while the storm raged. The ground was different now, scraped clean, foundation removed, all evidence of what had happened here erased except in the memories of those who'd survived. I pulled out both items from my pocket, my grandmother's wartime compass and the new one my father had given me. The needles in both pointed steadily north, unwavering despite everything around them that had changed. My phone buzzed. A text from Nathan with a photo attached, him and Mark in their new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, both of them grinning at the camera. The message read, "Home. Finally." I smiled and sent back a heart emoji, then put the phone away. A woman jogged past with her dog, nodded a greeting. Two teenagers sat on the dunes sharing earbuds, watching the sunset. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the waterline, moving slowly but together. Normal life, continuing around the spaces where extraordinary things had happened. I thought about Emma Hayes, starting her nursing program with the same terror and excitement I'd felt entering boot camp at 19. About the other scholarship recipients, Marcus at the Coast Guard Academy, learning that service meant protecting others. About all the lives that would be touched by people we'd equipped to help. The scholarship fund had become something bigger than I'd imagined. What had started as a way to honor my grandmother's memory had grown into a living system, taking resources that had been locked away in property and ego and transforming them into opportunity for people who'd choose meaning over comfort. My father's contribution had arrived last week, anonymous as I'd insisted, $50,000 with a note that said only, "For the work that matters." It wasn't redemption. Money couldn't buy that. And my father was learning, slowly, painfully, that some debts could never be fully repaid. But it was participation. It was showing up. It was choosing to be part of something larger than his own pride. Dr. Kim had told my mother that the hardest part of therapy wasn't the big revelations. It was the small, daily practice of choosing differently. My father was learning to ask instead of command, to listen instead of dismiss, to sit with discomfort instead of controlling it away. He'd asked my mother last week what she wanted for their new house. Not what she thought would impress visitors, not what would match his furniture, but what she actually wanted. She'd set a studio with north-facing light for painting. He'd hired an architect the next day. Small steps. Imperfect progress. But movement in a direction that felt more honest than anything he'd done in the previous 80 years. My mother had invited me to dinner at their new place next month. Smaller house in a quiet neighborhood, no circular driveway, no facade to maintain. She'd sounded nervous on the phone, like she wasn't sure I'd come. "It won't be fancy. I'm still learning to cook for just the two of us. And your father might be awkward. He's trying, but—" "I'll be there, Mom." "Really? Really?" The relief in her voice had been palpable. 52 years of silence, and she was still surprised when someone showed up for her. Anchor nudged my leg, ready to head back. His arthritis was worse in the evening, and the walk from the car had been long. I scratched his ear one more time, then started back across the sand. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just my truck and a couple of other vehicles. I lifted Anchor into the passenger seat. He couldn't jump anymore, and he settled with a heavy sigh that sounded like contentment. The drive home took me past all the familiar landmarks. The VA hospital where I volunteered on Thursdays, helping other veterans navigate the bureaucracy of disability claims and PTSD treatment. The Habitat for Humanity office where Nathan spent his days building homes for families who needed them. St. Paul's Episcopal, where my mother had started attending a women's support group for people reclaiming their voices after decades of silence. Norfolk had changed since I was a kid, but the bones of it remained. The shipyards where my career had begun. The neighborhoods that had flooded during Hurricane Sam. The coffee shop where Nathan and I met for our weekly check-ins. Home wasn't just a place. It was the accumulation of moments chosen, paths taken, Decisions made when the easy option was to stay silent or walk away. I pulled into my driveway and helped anchor down from the truck. The house was small and ordinary, nothing impressive by my father's standards. But the mortgage was mine. The choices inside were mine. The life I'd built within these walls was entirely, authentically mine. Inside, I fed Anchor and poured myself a glass of water. The kitchen table was covered with scholarship applications for next year's cycle. 43 applicants for 12 available spots. Each application told a story. Military kids who'd grown up moving every 2 years, finding resilience in instability. Disaster survivors who'd lost everything, but hadn't lost their determination to help others. Young people choosing EMT training over law school, nursing over finance, Coast Guard over comfortable corporate tracks. We'd have to make hard choices. Not everyone could receive funding, but even the ones we couldn't support this year would know that someone believed in the path they'd chosen. That service mattered, that choosing meaning over money wasn't foolish. It was brave. I sat down and started reading applications, making notes, highlighting stories that stood out. This was the work my grandmother had prepared me for, though I hadn't understood it at the time. Not the management of property or money, but the cultivation of purpose. Around 10 p.m., my phone rang, my father's number. I almost didn't answer, then remembered Dr. Kim's advice. Healing requires showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. Hello? Victoria, I hope I'm not calling too late. It's fine. What's up? There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing, gathering courage. I wanted to ask you something about the scholarship applications. Your mother mentioned you were reviewing them tonight, and I wondered, could I help? Not make decisions, that's your domain, but maybe review applications, help with the logistics? The request caught me off guard. My father asking to help, asking permission, acknowledging boundaries. You're serious? I am. I've been attending the board meetings, listening to the recipients. It matters, Victoria. What you've built here matters, and I'd like to be useful if you'll let me. I thought about saying no, about keeping this separate, protected from his influence. But that would have been punishing him for who he used to be instead of seeing who he was trying to become. Okay, yes, come by tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. We'll go through the applications together. Thank you. The relief in his voice mirrored my mother's from earlier. Two people learning that showing up was the first step, and being allowed to stay was grace. After we hung up, I sat with the decision, feeling its weight. Letting my father into this space was risky. He might revert to old patterns, try to control, criticize, manage, but he might not. And if I never gave him the chance to prove he'd changed, I'd be the one keeping us both locked in the past. Anchor limped over and rested his head on my knee, brown eyes knowing in the way old dogs' eyes always are. He'd been with me through multiple deployments, through the injury that ended my career, through 14 years of rebuilding a life my father had tried to destroy. He knew something about forgiveness, about living in the present instead of being trapped by what came before.
What do you think, boy? Am I crazy?
His tail thumped twice. I'd take that as approval. The applications blurred together after a while. So many deserving people, so few resources. But that was the work, wasn't it? Making hard choices, trying to do the most good with limited means. The military had taught me that. You couldn't save everyone. You could only save the ones you could reach and trust that your efforts created ripples. Around midnight, I set the applications aside and walked out to the back porch. The neighborhood was quiet, just the hum of air conditioners and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. Ordinary sounds of ordinary life, but there was nothing ordinary about the journey that had led here. Court battles and heart attacks and public confessions. 14 years of silence breaking open into messy, complicated healing. A family that had been shattered finding new shapes that might, eventually, become whole. The stars overhead were the same stars I'd navigated by during night watches at sea. The same stars my grandmother had seen from hospital ships in the Pacific. The same stars that would guide the next generation of people we equipped to serve. Some things endured. Some things pointed the way forward even when everything else was uncertain. I stayed there until the air got cold, until Anchor scratched at the door asking to come out, until the weight of the day settled into something I could carry into tomorrow. A year ago, I'd walked into a courtroom expecting vindication. What I'd found was something more complicated: truth spoken, damage acknowledged, the long, slow work of healing what might never fully heal. The waves at the beach had taught me their lesson. Persistence matters more than perfection. Showing up matters more than having all the answers. Moving forward matters more than erasing the past. My father would come tomorrow. We'd review applications together. He might be awkward, he might default to control, but he was trying, and that had to count for something. My mother was painting watercolors and finding her voice at 78. Nathan was building homes and building a marriage and building a life that was authentically his. And I was here, running a scholarship fund and volunteering at the VA and sitting on back porches with aging dogs and learning that healing doesn't have a finish line. It just has next steps. Some families are born whole. Some spend lifetimes becoming whole. Both are valid journeys. The work continues, not perfect, not complete, but honest. And that, I'd learned, was enough.